Well, that's Tim Hawkins. He'll be with us on September 7th. You can buy your tickets on his website or on Facebook through the event that you'll find there. Check it out. I want to say hello to those who are joining us online, as well as to the campus in West Lafayette at Burnett Creek Elementary School. We're glad that you're with us today. Hey, everybody, would you help me to welcome those that are joining us right now? Awesome. Well, today we are starting on week 4 of a 5-week series on the Psalms. And if you have been here at all, you know that the Psalms is this big book in the middle of your Bible. It's a prayer book. It covers 1,000 years. It meets people along a pretty big continuum in terms of experiences in life and their feelings about it, their approach to God, the things they have to say. The book of Psalms is important, we know, because it is, in the Old Testament, it is the most quoted book in the New Testament. It has a lot to say about Psalms in the New Testament. Today, as we look at the Psalms, we're going to look at Psalm 3. And I just remind you of what I suggested to you last week, and that is that in our culture, we kind of got 2 ways that we deal with feelings. And the book of Psalms is a book about feelings. It's about the heart. And one way is to deny your feelings. That's one thing our culture says. Our culture also suggests sometimes that you should go with your feelings no matter what they tell you. And the book of Psalms takes another route with feelings, and that is take your feelings to God. Pray your feelings. And today we're going to look at a story, and we're going to look at the Psalm 3. It's connected to one of the most difficult passages of David's life, King David, 3,000 years ago. He writes a lot of the Psalms, not all of them by any stretch, but Psalm 3, it's written in the context of him fleeing from his son Absalom. And in fact, if you want to open your Bible, if you have a Bible with you and you want to open it up, you can see there's over many of the Psalms, there's kind of an explanatory phrase above the Psalm. That's called the superscript. And here in Psalm 3, the superscript says this: a Psalm of David when he fled his son Absalom. And if you don't know that story, Absalom is a son of David who is very good looking. He's a charismatic, popular person with long curly hair. And he leads a revolt against David. He gets the army to come around him. He takes one of David's closest advisors and turns him against David to himself. He goes around and he tries to rally the people of Israel. And their goal, at a certain point, tens of thousands of them evidently, is to track down King David, to depose him and kill him. And that's the context that Psalm 3 is written in. And so in your life, if you've ever been surrounded by your enemies, or if you've ever been in a situation maybe where somebody you loved and thought that you could trusted betrayed you, that's the heart situation that Psalm 3 is written from. Let's look at verse 1. It says, "Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me?" Now, as you look at that, we're going to see in these first 2 verses kind of 2 stages of fear. Right here, this is kind of like a fight or flight stage of fear. It's kind of the most primal version of fear. It's when you think somebody's out to get you. It's when the bully calls your name across the playground and you want to run as hard as you can to get away from him. It's when somebody threatens to hurt you in some way or expose you or take you down. That's what David is feeling, that kind of fear. But there's a second stage of fear that's mentioned here in verse 2, or that's hinted at. And that's what I'd call anxiety. Anxiety is kind of prolonged fear. Anxiety is what you feel when, you feel fear and you can't stop it. You can't stop thinking about it. You can't stop feeling the feelings. You're laying awake at night. It's drilling a hole in your soul. And look at what David says here in verse 2. He says, "Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him." Now, maybe when you look at this, you think, well, I don't know what this has to do with me here in the 21st century. I'm not, a king of a small realm in the ancient Middle East. What's this got to do with me? This has everything to do with you and me. Because here, not only is he tracked down by his enemies, but what's David thinking about? He's wondering, well, what is really going to happen to me? What's actually going on here? This is a crisis of David's identity, a crisis of David's soul. He's wondering if the people are right, if in fact God has abandoned him because his son has turned against him and he's going to die. He's wondering if in fact he's going to lose everything that he has brought around himself as king. And so he's tested by the kinds of questions that everybody is tested by. David's very identity is not only being attacked physically, but spiritually. And fear is normal, but when it's on all the time, fear will eat you alive. This is my first observation here, just something to recognize about you. Maybe you're starting a new school year and you're wondering how it's going to turn out. Maybe you're starting a new job or a new marriage, or you're starting a new relationship. I don't know where you're at. And you have questions that dog you that are close to fear and anxiety. I just want you to know it's normal. Fear and anxiety are inevitable in every human life. These are things that every person, no matter who they are, no matter how much money they have, no matter what their success is, no matter what their talents are, no matter what their intelligence is, fear and anxiety are issues that everyone has to deal with. And we're the way that God has made us, we are wired to deal with fear. Right? We have adrenaline glands so that when we experience enough stress, when we're being chased by a dog down the street, happened to me a few times, being chased by a big dog down the street, your adrenaline glands are pressed on, and suddenly you've got more energy. You're raging with excitement, and you feel like you can do something more than you maybe actually can. And so here, we are kind of wired for fear. God made it so that we could cope with fear. You were made with sweat glands. You might start sweating when you feel a lot of stress. You were made so that when you feel stress and you feel fear, your muscles automatically tense up. But like I said, when that's on all the time, that becomes too much. When that's on all the time, you can't eat right, you can't sleep right. You probably can't stay focused. You know, the American Psychological Association, they say that 18% of adult America, 18% have an anxiety disorder. That's more than just experiencing anxiety. That's where anxiety has gone too far in your life, basically. And so David, he's asking himself, what's really going to happen here? Am I going to be destroyed by my son whom I love? Or am I going to have to kill him because he's attacking the throne that it's my charge to protect? And so we go on to verse 3. But you, Lord, are a shield around me. You're a shield around me. One thing I found interesting as I studied this passage was to learn what this shield is. The word shield here, it's not like a little circle that you carry on your arm. When he says you're a shield around me, what he's got in mind is that in the ancient world, if you were following the general and you're attacking something, you've got this shield. It's like a door around you. It's kind of like this, and it's taller than you, and you keep that in front of you. And he's saying, you, Lord, in spite of the attacks that I'm under, in spite of the ways that I am being harassed, in spite of the questions that I have about myself, in spite of the things that other people are saying about me, you're a shield around me. And then he says, you're my glory. the one who lifts my head. Now, I'll get to that in just a second, but one thing I want to explore with you is this. It's that when he says that God is a shield around him, part of what is involved there is that these shields that were like a door and were kind of curved around you and were involved in attack, they're not really useful in retreating. They're useful in moving forward. And for a lot of us, what happens when we experience fear is we withdraw. We want to get away from the situation. But instead, one of the things that David is making clear to us, it's one of our observations today about this passage, is this. It's that the path to God's protection is through obedience. And so how this might impact us is that there are times when we've got to obey God, and it is a scary thing. There are times when we've got to stick with what God says, and we don't want to do it. But look, it's a protection when we obey the Lord, even when we're afraid. And then he says, "You're my glory and the lifter of my head." You know, David had all kinds of things that he could feel glad about or happy about. David was this wealthy guy. He lived in this amazing palace that he had built. David was someone who had expanded the borders of the kingdom of Israel in 1000 BC to the largest that they'd ever been. He was recognized as a warrior from very young in life. And he was famous already. They had written songs about King David. And he becomes so important. In fact, he is the central character of the Old Testament. There's more written about David than anyone else in the Old Testament. And so David, he may have a lot of things that he could rely on and that would be like good things from God. But you know what? Every single one of those things can disappoint. You can lose every single one of those things. In fact, that's the next reflection I just want to show you here today. That is, deriving identity and glory from God's blessings will disappoint. Maybe you think of yourself as kind of a smart person. Maybe you think of yourself as a successful person. Maybe you think of yourself as good-looking or clever. Maybe you're really proud of your family, your children, or some talent that you have. Anything that you derive glory from, that's those kinds of things, it's going to fail you. You're going to lose it somehow at some point. Somehow, placing your identity and your glory in temporary blessings, as good as they might be, it's going to let you down. What does David say here? You're my glory. You're the lifter of my head. It's not the things I've accomplished. It's not the blessings I've received that bring me joy in life. It's you, God. You lift up my head. You're the one who makes me content. You're the one who helps me to straighten up. Look at verse 4. He says, I call out to the Lord, and He answers me from His holy mountain. Now, this is an interesting phrase, holy mountain, as it is the case in much of the Bible. Any particular phrase has layers of meaning kind of baked into it. What does he mean when he says, He answers me from His holy mountain? Well, on the one hand, you could think about the tabernacle. The tabernacle was a place where they had set up a tent and sacrifices were made there and God's presence dwelt there in some special way, and that was on the holy mountain. That's where the temple would be built. Maybe that's what he's referring to. That's certainly part of it. But the key word in referring to the Lord as His shield tells us that this also refers to another mountain. That's the mountain in Genesis chapter 15. Abram, the father of the nation of Israel, he's going through some conflicts. He's been told by God that God's going to give him this land and give him this countless family that will follow after him. And God shows up in Genesis 15:1 and he says this. It says this, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield." There's that word. Same word that starts Psalm 3. "Your very great reward." He shows up and he says, "Don't worry. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to defend you. You feel uncertain. You feel afraid. But I'm going to take care of it." And then in verse 8, Abram says to God, "Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?" God, I want to trust you, but somehow I feel anxious about this. How am I going to know that you're really going to give me the land, that I'm really going to have this family that follows after me? It's not in your notes today, but I just want to tell you the story. I want you to be aware of how it is that God assured Abram of this. And that is this. God came to Abram and he said, "Take a number of animals and birds and cut them in two and lay them on two sides of a straight line." Now, Abram knows when he hears this something that you likely don't know. Abram thinks that God is going to invite him to enter into a contract, a covenant, make promises to him. And this is how they did it in the ancient Near Eastern world. They cut these animals in two, and then both parties would walk through the severed animals and recite a curse, basically. They would say, "Hey, if I ever don't make good on my promise, may what's happened to this animal happen to me." Now, maybe if we made promises like that in the modern world, maybe some more promises would be kept. I don't know. Can you imagine if you had to sign up for your credit card like that? So Abram, he cuts these animals in half. He goes and he lays down. The sun goes down. He wakes up and he sees a torch passing through the middle of these animals. And what's the Lord saying? The Lord's saying, "Abram, I promise you. Abram, if this doesn't work out for you, I will sacrifice for you. Abram, if this doesn't work out for you, I'm going to lay down my life for you." Well, that's interesting. But as I mentioned, there are several layers to this thing about the answers coming from the holy mountain. That's certainly another place where there are answers coming from a holy mountain. There's another holy mountain. We have a whole lot more understanding being on this side of the cross. The cross is on a holy hill. The Lord, He lays down His life on a hill for us. He makes a way out for us. Why am I telling you this? Why does this appear in Psalm 3 when David is in the middle of the kind of calamity that he is in his relationships and even in his very survival? Why would he say, "Your answers come to me from your holy hill"? It's because it's because when you fix your heart on God's love, on God's commitment, on God's sacrifice for you, it has a way of lifting you out of the pit of anxiety, of fear, of despair, of betrayal and hurt. I'd say it like this. It's our next point there in your outline, that remembering God's commitment and love for you awakens faith. Awakens faith. When you remember that that in fact the Lord is for you. This changes how you look at everything else. Well, David, he prays some other things here in Psalm 3. We're not going to look at them, but he says that he asks God to take down his enemies. He says, strike them on the jaw and break their teeth. He's got some very animated feelings right here in Psalm 3. But I think the way the psalm ends is maybe the most instructive thing for us to look at when it comes to how to pray through our feelings when we feel fear, when we feel anxiety, when we feel betrayal, hurt from people that we've trusted and loved. Look at how the psalm ends. Verse 8, David writes, "From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people." May your blessing be on your people. Do you notice what David did here? He turns the focus from himself and his own problems, his own fear, his own wounds, to other people. Why is that? Did you know that fear and love are opposite concepts? Fear is connected to self-preservation. When you're feeling fear, you're thinking about how it is that you can stay safe, how you can maintain your position, how you can maintain your reputation, whatever it is. That's what fear is about. But love, on the other hand, love is about giving yourself away. It's about self-giving. And in fact, these diametrically opposed concepts, they're put together in the same sentence in the New Testament. The New Testament says it like this: perfect love drives out fear. You know, when you're suffering most deeply in your life, one of the best things that you can do is find a way to focus on others. You will drive yourself insane if all your free time is just spent thinking about how much you hurt. You will drill a hole in your soul that only God can fix if you just focus on how it is you've been wronged, or you just spend your days wondering how it's all going to turn out. You know, fear and faith, they're different too, but they ask us the same question. They ask us to believe things that haven't happened yet. And you know, when it comes to pain and trouble, one of the greatest strategic ways for you to heal yourself is to focus on others, to do things for others. One of the insidious things about long-term illness, and anyone who's been sick for a long time will tell you this. When you are stuck at home, when you're like stuck in bed and you can't go anywhere and you can't do anything else except try and deal with your sickness, your illness, your fatigue, your pain. If you're stuck like that, one of the most frustrating things is you can't do anything for anybody else. You can only focus on fixing what's wrong with you. And that's a difficult thing to break out of. And what I'm saying to you today is, some of you, you've been stuck in kind of a cycle of pain, of fear, of anxiety. You've been questioning and questioning and questioning. How is this all going to turn out? Will this ever get better? Can you believe that this happened to me? And you have not let that go. And what I'm saying to you is, you need to instead focus on the needs of others. Focus on how you can contribute to the well-being of others. He says, may your blessing be on your people. In essence, he's asking God to bless other people. Because that is the best pivot out of feelings of fear, anxiety, and hurt. It is to focus on the needs of others and meet a need in somebody else. We live in this culture right now that tells us a lie. It tells us that the path to happiness, it tells us that the path to happiness is to curate on our own private lives the very best we can. So we got to stream all our own shows, just watch what we want to watch. Everybody's got a device going. And then we've got to get some headphones so we can't really hear anyone else or interact with anyone else while we enjoy exactly the content that we want. And we've got to figure out how like we can insulate ourselves from everybody outside us, because that will lead to happiness. And I'm telling you, that is a recipe for misery. You have got to get focused on other people if you want to move beyond the negative things that have pierced who you are. At the end of this service, we're going to hand you one of these books. It's our life groups book. It says, "Find Your Herd" on the front. There are a group of people here, they're like you. We meet at different times, different places. These groups cover different kinds of content. But the life groups are strategic. You're going to move on in your life. You're going to get better in your life. You've got to connect with some other people. And so I want to encourage you, if you're trying to figure out how you can apply what I'm saying to you today, then figure out how you can focus on others. Figure out how you can be a blessing to others. It's the way through your dark night of the soul.